éntsa Qamù'ta7 Wallace, Neilthni in Kukwat, Jennifer Frank, skwátsits, Qamù'ta, Neilthni in Eric Wallace. Hello, my name is Qamù'ta. I'm from the Lil'wat Nation. My grandmother is Jennifer Frank. Her name is Qamù'ta, or her name passed down to my mom, and then to me, and then my grandfather is the late Eric Wallace. The town I grew up in, or the nation, is the Lil'wat Nation, but the town I grew up in was Mount Curry New Site. And there was growing up is a small town, a normal small town reservation. And then the next town was Pemberton. And even though the two were so close and there was so much Indigenous people, and even though in the schools we did have the chance to share our stories with them, there was still bias even within the school and even between Indigenous people. We always have this idea of an Indigenous person, like in the media, we're represented as nice dark brown skin and long dark hair with brown eyes. I have fair skin and I have brown hair. And I was talking to a friend about how we're so at risk as Indigenous women and Two-Spirit for being MMIW. And then she looked at me and she was like, some of us. And even though I'm light-skinned, that I feel like when I say I'm Indigenous, some people, they're like, I can't tell. And film and social media and like history has tainted our image of what Indigenous people should look like, that even sometimes I'm not even recognized as a valid Indigenous person. And even when I'm hanging out with my white friends, it seems like they forget. And there's just this feeling of being in between and not having a sense of belonging, almost, of not being Indigenous enough, or just having to feel like I have something to prove. And that is a result of how we've been represented in film. And I think a big example of that is that people recognize the most. And when we bring this up, people can imagine that because it's something that's been passed around on social media a lot, is the Bugs Bunny and the Indigenous, like the Western episode where the big Indigenous man comes out. You can't see his eyes. It's just big, stoic, no smile. That's still how people see us today. Like, the image has really dehumanized us, and seeing us with no emotion and just tough, strong, drunken Indians. And there's even a huge bias against Métis and like whether if they're like true Indigenous. And I don't think that's fair. No one should have to prove anything. Like, I grew up on the res, and no matter if you grow up on the res or not, and you should be proud. You shouldn't have to feel like you have to prove anything. I have things written down here, but other than that, I would like to focus on a more positive note, and how now, growing up, being older, and being able to watch Indigenous films being created as like the Reservation Dogs and also the Prey movie, and Encanto, even though it's not here Indigenous, it's still like it made me cry because the they portray how generational trauma can pass on and how it really does affect the younger generations. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. But I think it's really beautiful seeing Indigenous people really have a voice and being able to be seen as human and that we do have emotion. um, Reservation Dogs, I think, is a beautiful TV series that truly does represent um, how growing up on the res really is. There are some supernatural aspects to it, but that's also a part of us. Like, I'm not saying we're supernatural, but our spirituality, they and how they represent the Sasquatch, not just as some folklore, but as a spirit, and how uh, family is a really big topic on it. And um, I really relate to this one character named Bear, where he really does want to leave the res because of all the not so great things about it, because, you know, there are some toxic things that do happen due to the generational trauma and the colonialization forced upon Indigenous people. But um, seeing how he finds himself, it's a really realistic coming of age and how they're wanting to escape. But near the end of the series, he realizes, like, it. I've only watched the first season, but near the end, it seems like he starts to realize that maybe he doesn't want to go. And that's really how I felt after I left. But uh, even, but sometimes you gotta leave and come back with more to bring to help heal. And I'm sorry if that doesn't make sense, but I'm saying whatever genuinely comes to mind. But I really do recommend Res Dogs and or Reservation Dogs is the actual title of it. It it beautifully shows how human we are, and also a lot of humor, and how humor is medicine. Laughing is medicine is what I always hear, and I always continue to say it. Um, and not only film I've been really happy with, but also books. I've been really happy with all the new books that have been coming out, not just showing, um, our truth, but also there was kind of this dystopic uh, book that takes place on the reservation in the North Territories, I believe, where they're isolated. And it's, I think it's a really awesome story. I think it does represent where we come from and how life is and how life is up there, where they have to wait quite a few weeks. Like they have to get a supply into the grocery store, and then things just run out. They have to wait till the next order comes in. But something like in this book, they're just living life normally, and then all of a sudden everything just stops. The power goes out, and I forgot if their emergency power, the backup power was, or the emergency power backup was working, but they had a supply of it. And it was really this seemed like this post-apocalyptic type story, and I thought that was really, really cool. I recommend it. But growing up, never had too much of that, and it was normally just a lot of what was shown in schools was more of things that happened traditionally and shows our truth. But I really like that people now, well, it is important to show our truth, but I really, really like how people now are taking our truth and making it something really cool. An awesome story. And uh, another, and talking about books and not just dystopic, like telling our truth, but also something cool. More people are creating memoirs, and I love memoirs. It's my favorite type of book, and or type type of genre of book, because I really love relating to the character. And it almost feels like I'm reading the author's mind, and I really sometimes I can really relate to them, and it helps me personally. So that's why I personally like reading them. But a book that really, really calls to me as an Indigenous woman, and I recommend to people to understanding how life is growing up as an Indigenous woman, because like being oh Indigenous but also being a woman, it's hard being a woman enough in this really patriotic world. When so the book I read that it really spoke to me was A Mind Spread Out on the Ground, and it was by Alicia. Can't remember her name. I think it was Alicia. I can't remember. I'd have to look this up really quick. But A Mind Spread Out on the Ground is about a woman who suffers with Indigenous woman who suffers with depression, and a mind spread out on the ground in their Indigenous language translates to how translates to depression. But when you translate it to English, when you look at it, it means a mind spread out on the ground. But that's just how they felt. Like they look at someone, how they're feeling, and they're just like, oh, his mind's just all over the ground. And I'm like, that really does represent how I feel. And I think Indigenous languages are just so beautiful in that way, because we don't just see what it is, we also see go past to describe it. And it's really poetic in a way. And I heard one time that when you learn a different language, you also learn a different mindset with that language, because even though they mean the same thing, they don't mean they some go beyond beyond above and beyond of describing it, or of saying it. I guess I don't exactly know how to voice that right now, but I just can really relate more to a mind spread out on the ground rather than just saying depression. But she goes on and talks about her life growing up as Indigenous, and also she was also half Indigenous and white, and she talks about her struggles as a light-skinned Native woman, and it really called to me. And growing up with her mother who suffered with mental health issues, and also thinking on how I grew up with parents who also grew up with mental health issues and drinking, and also the struggle that came with not being able to put food on the table every day, or not living with hot water, and not having the convenience to just call somebody and be like, hey, our water is broken, can you come fix it right away? Like, a lot of the things that she said in the book just it went above and beyond, and even went and has really been, and took a poetic turn in a poetic turn in explaining just how life is, I guess. That's what I have to say about it. I guess just how life is. I can't, because as an Indigenous person, that's just how life is. And I'm sorry if that's a very blunt way of saying it, but I've came to live with it, and I even miss the struggle sometimes, because that just brings me back to the simpler times. Like, even living in the city, I do enjoy it, but living on the res, like, I don't miss not having hot water. Like, I love hot water, trust me. But when I talk about that, is I love just having a simple meal, no matter if it's just macaroni and hot dogs, or just mashed potatoes, rice, and just plain meat. Like, uh, that's just how I grew up. Um, and even now in the media, I'd like to move on to media now. um, and even I've tried saying I wanted to go on a positive note, but it ended up getting emotional anyways. But with TikTok, people have really been able to reclaim our voice and our truth, and also being able to put a face to our name, being able to make us human rather than this dehumanized image that people get. We've been doing a really awesome job lately, and a lot of people have been voicing their takes, and also spreading laughter. Like I said, laughter is medicine, and being able to express who we are, sharing our songs, dance, art, beadwork, our history. Like, I didn't know up north, like, even they're even teaching other Indigenous people, like up north, I didn't know that they ate beluga, and now I want to try it. Yeah. Um, so things like food and the history, and we just, with media, it's amazing because we can share whatever we want literally at the press of a button. You can make a video and you can share about you, or you can make someone laugh, or you can even sit there with someone and say, let's take a moment. Just take this moment. And I think TikTok, like, no matter how destructive it can be, it can also bring us together in the most beautiful ways. And that's not just TikTok, but Instagram, maybe Facebook. You can post events on there. But yeah. Hopefully, Mac. I Kukstimkauch. I really do appreciate everyone's time. And sorry I didn't clarify what I said. I just said goodbye and thank you. I really do appreciate everyone's time and in listening to me. I really am not used to talking, but yeah, thank you for okay.